Whenever we, as a society, allow an animal to die from starvation or abuse, or whenever a euthanizing agent enters the bloodstream of a healthy animal, we wound humanity. Anna Catherine Briggs.
Anna Catherine Briggs was born Anna Catherine Reynolds in Washington, D.C. on December 9, 1909. Her father died when she was 3, and her mother was too poor to keep the children together. So, at age 4, Catherine was sent to St. Vincent's Orphanage in Washington, where she stayed until she was 8. Of her years in the orphanage, Catherine described certain aspects of her time there as being somewhat parallel to the experiences of unwanted cats and dogs in archaic shelters.
Young people today might wonder what it was like to live in an orphanage. In St. Vincent's, the orphan's life was not a bad one. Regimented, yes. Bells rang and we formed lines. Obedience was firmly demanded. We kept the corridors waxed and shining, every piece of furniture dusted, and all the clothes mended. It was hard work. Still, we thrived. The food we ate, though bland, was nourishing and wholesome. But I can remember the days when the halls of St. Vincent were full of whispers that someone was coming to look us over for possible adoption. I did not realize that my sister Margaret and I were not eligible, since we still had our mother. The prospective adoptive parent would arrive, and we would all be lined up. I'm sure each girl hoped fervently, as I did, that she would be chosen. In our lonely children's hearts, the hope of a real home still lived on, the hope of our own loving family. But I was never chosen. Each time I was passed over, I was despondent. I now wonder if this is how dogs and cats feel, penned up in animal shelters, longing for their home, watching a friendly human being walk by, hoping without words for the love every animal thrives on.
After living in St. Vincent's, Catherine went to live with her aunt in Frederick, Maryland, of which there are no photographs, but Catherine describes this time as
the darkest days of my childhood.
At age 13, Catherine's dreams of being reunited with her family came true when her mother permitted her to return home. Shortly after Catherine returned home, her dreams of companionship with dogs also came true in the spring of 1925 with her dear companion Cy, a German shepherd who had been whipped repeatedly by his former owner. Catherine cured Cy's wound just as she has thousands of other cats and dogs in her life with her love, and Cy reciprocated with his love for 13 more years. At age 15, Catherine met James Briggs, a government lawyer. To her, he was the kindest man she'd ever known, and, indeed, the most influential in determining her life's work. James and Catherine met, appropriately, over a dog. James Briggs, as it turned out, was as interested in Catherine as he was the dog. The interest was mutual, especially when Catherine learned that her benefactor was the president of the Humane Education Society of Washington, D.C., and operated the Be Kind to Animals Rest Farm, a sanctuary for dogs, cats, and old horses in Potomac, Maryland.
I learned to love that man so much, says Catherine. I never got over that. You never do if you love someone. 3 years later, Catherine was taking care of the rest farm animals as Mrs. Briggs, and Mr. Briggs became Briggsy, as Catherine affectionately referred to him.
They married on Catherine's 18th birthday, December 9, 1927, and so began Mrs. Briggs' humane work for animals. Together, they had 4 children, Jim, Jack, Bob, and Ginger. Regretfully, The aftermath of the Great Depression resulted in Briggsy and Catherine losing the rest farm, and they were forced to carry on their humane work on a smaller scale.
Briggsy was Mrs. Briggs's mentor. He intensified her natural affection for animals and confirmed her inherent beliefs of how they should be treated, which became the philosophical foundation of her life's work on their behalf.
So he could go up to a wild cat or a vicious dog and just talk to them. And those animals would really calm down a lot and let him pick them up. Many a day he took a dog into his office, which was a government office in Washington, and hold it under his desk until I could come down and pick it up. It seemed like the dogs knew that all they had to do was go down to the Internal Revenue building in Washington.
Following her beloved husband's death in 1945, Mrs. Briggs continued caring for homeless animals and working to build another sanctuary. In 1950, following her creation of NHES, Mrs. Briggs created Peace Plantation Animal Sanctuary on a 150-acre farm in Sterling, Virginia.
At our original place in Sterling, Virginia, Ruby had to work pretty much alone with feeding the animals and cleaning and everything. So she would prepare a whole tub of food and start out with a lot of trays alongside the tub and on top of the tub of food. And as she went along between the building where she prepared the food, which was a dog kennel, and the kitty corner, which was then required a walk of at least 500 yards away, she'd be having the trays rattling the whole way. And the cats would come up from nowhere and leave everything to come follow the wheelbarrow with the food. Yes, that was Ruby. She was the greatest I ever could imagine. She would just take care of the animals from morning till night, answer the telephone, and do everything nobody else could imagine. I really loved her, and I miss her very much. She died in September 1984.
In 1965, due to the continued difficulty of paying the ever-increasing property taxes, Mrs. Briggs was forced to sell the property in Sterling and move to a smaller property in Leesburg until 1984, when new zoning regulations necessitated that she find yet another location where the sanctuary would be permitted. This time, Mrs. Briggs' search took her to Walton, New York, where Peace Plantation continues its tranquil beginnings by providing lifetime care for more than 325 animals.
Peace Plantation is an incarnation of Mrs. Briggs's philosophical belief system that all animals have intrinsic value in and of themselves, and therefore our stewardship must not involve the killing of one animal just to make room for another animal. Peace Plantation is a labor of love, and its various barns and outbuildings were renovated to provide lifelong sanctuary for animals that may not get adopted. It does so by caring for animals, specifically cats in large colony environments, a few resident dogs, and various farm animals.
In October 1999, Mrs. Briggs expanded NHES's direct animal care services through the construction and operation of the Briggs Animal Adoption Center.
In October 2000, Mrs. Briggs, with the help of her sister, Margaret Hutchison, former NHES treasurer, and Charles Waddell, former Virginia State Senator, cut the ribbon to open the BAAC. BAAC is located near the Virginia-West Virginia border. The adoption program takes in stray, abandoned, or otherwise unwanted dogs and cats and provides mandatory spay-neuters, medical care, and obedience training, and then places the animals in adoptive homes. Homeless animals find a loving cradle of compassion with both staff and volunteers at the state-of-the-art Briggs Animal Adoption Center. In addition to serving as the program site for the Briggs Animal Adoption Center, this facility has since become the headquarters of the National Humane Education Society and Spay Today. During the few short years that the BAAC has been in existence, it has hosted an annual Pedal for Pooches bike ride to bring attention to the plight of homeless animals, it has held annual adoption alumni events, and more recently, a Furry Fun Fest. The BAAC has served as the host site for the National Humane Education Society's Cool to Care Camp, where children learn about kindness to animals through hands-on projects and puppet shows. Mrs. Briggs, all your life you have worked to create a more humane world, and we would like to share a few of your more publicized accomplishments that benefited society.
In 1957, at risk of personal injury, Mrs. Briggs entered the demolition sites of the slums in our nation's capital, where she rescued 84 dogs and puppies and 23 cats and kittens. In the early 1960s, Mrs. Briggs rescued an estimated 50 dogs and cats that had been abandoned at the construction site of Dulles International Airport. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, once again, at risk of personal injury, Mrs. Briggs, her daughter Ginger, and son-in-law Earl Duncan descended the labyrinth of tunnels beneath New York City's Grand Central Station, where they rescued nearly 300 cats and kittens. Also, in the 1980s, Mrs. Briggs joined national efforts to reduce animal experimentation through newspaper campaigns and grassroots picketing of laboratories.
And finally, dear Mrs. Briggs, we share with you just a very small sampling of the thousands of animals whose lives your compassion and dedication has saved and enriched. We thank you.
When I am down and oh my soul so weary, when troubles come and my heart burdens me, am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be. Stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong.
Mrs. Briggs, we applaud you and your lifetime of caring. The final lesson of mankind's evolution may well be: animals are sacred and deserving of our protection. Anna Catherine Briggs. This video is, in part, dedicated to the memory of Mrs. Briggs' husband, Briggsy, and their 3 sons, Jim, Jack, and Bob, who helped build the original Peace Plantation Animal Sanctuary.